Before the story begins, let me ask you something. What would you do if your own child betrayed the last memory of the love of your life? A single phone call exposed a secret that shattered my trust forever. If stories about family, loss, and shocking truths speak to your heart, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and stay with me until the end. Because this story changes everything. The morning the phone rang, I was standing in the garage with the door half open, letting sunlight spill across the concrete floor like a quiet blessing. Dust floated through the air, dancing in slow motion, and for a moment I could almost pretend my husband was still there. That he'd step out from behind the workbench, wiping his hands on an old rag, smiling the way he used to when he caught me staring at the car. The car sat exactly where it always had. A 1967 Mustang Fastback, deep midnight blue. Polished chrome that still gleamed despite its age. It wasn't just metal and leather. It was memory. It was love. It was my husband's pride, and after he died, it became my sanctuary. My late husband Robert bought that car the year our son Daniel was born. He used to joke that the car and the baby were competing for his attention. Every Sunday morning, Robert would pull Daniel into the garage, sit him on the hood, and tell him stories about engines and horsepower like they were fairy tales. That car watched my son grow up. It was part of our family. After Robert passed away from a sudden heart attack, the world went quiet in a way I didn't know was possible. Daniel was already married by then. He lived across town with his wife, Melissa. They visited, but not often. Life was busy, they said. Paris plans, careers, dinners with friends. The garage became my place to breathe. I would sit in the driver's seat sometimes, close my eyes, and imagine Robert's hand resting over mine on the gearshift. It sounds silly, but grief doesn't ask for permission. That's why when the phone rang, I almost didn't answer. Hello? I said, my voice echoing slightly in the garage. Is this Margaret Hill? A man asked, polite but serious. Yes, this is she. My name is Thomas Green. I own Green Classic Motors downtown. I frowned, stepping away from the car. All right? I'm calling because your son, Daniel Hill, sold us a 1967 Mustang Fastback yesterday. Midnight blue. VIN ending in 427. The world tilted. I'm sorry, I said slowly, certain I'd misheard. Sold what? The Mustang, he repeated. Your late husband's car. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. That's impossible, I whispered. That car isn't his to sell. There was a pause on the other end, a heavy one. That's why I'm calling you, Mrs. Hill. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I leaned against the workbench, my knees weak. He came in with the title, Thomas continued. Said it was his inheritance, but something didn't sit right with me. He talked about taking his wife to Paris. Kept saying this was the only way. The garage felt smaller, colder. My husband left that car to me, I said, my voice trembling now. Daniel knows that. Another pause. Ma'am, I haven't finalized the paperwork yet. Payment hasn't been released. Tears welled in my eyes before I could stop them. Not just tears of grief, tears of betrayal. I need to see that car, I said. Please, you should come down here, Thomas replied gently. We need to talk. When the call ended, I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where the car had been just hours before. I hadn't even noticed it was gone. I hadn't gone into the garage the day before. Daniel had a spare key. I trusted him. I sank onto an old stool and pressed my hand to my chest. The grief I thought I had learned to live with cracked open again, fresh and sharp. My son had sold his father's soul for a vacation. I drove to the dealership in a fog, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Memories crashed into me with every mile. Daniel learning to drive in that car. Robert laughing when Daniel stalled it for the first time. Family road trips, late-night talks. At Green Classic Motors, the Mustang sat under bright lights, looking out of place like a wild animal trapped behind glass. Thomas was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes. He shook my hand gently. I'm so sorry, he said. I lost my wife last year. I recognized that look. I walked straight to the car and placed my hand on the hood. It was still warm somehow, like it remembered us. He said he needed the money, Thomas continued. Said Melissa always dreamed of Paris, said it was now or never. I closed my eyes. Did he seem conflicted? I asked. Thomas hesitated. He seemed determined. But people lie best when they're convincing themselves. My phone buzzed in my purse. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. I answered. Mom, he said quickly. I was going to tell you. When? I asked quietly. After we booked the trip. The silence between us stretched thin. You sold your father's car, I said. It's just a car, he snapped. Dad's gone. Something inside me broke. That car was your father's heart, I said. And you sold it without asking me. Melissa's voice chimed in faintly in the background. Tell her we needed this. I hung up. Thomas looked at me waiting. I want my car back, I said. He nodded. Then let's make sure it goes home where it belongs. As I signed the paperwork to void the sale, I realized something painful and undeniable. Grief changes people, but greed reveals them. And the hardest truth of all. Sometimes the deepest betrayal doesn't come from strangers, it comes from your own child. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, please remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video. We'll see you then. The drive home from the dealership felt longer than it ever had before. The Mustang followed behind me on a flatbed truck, secured with thick straps like it was being escorted back to where it belonged. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half afraid it would disappear again. Like a bad dream you wake up from only to realize it's still real. When we pulled into my driveway, neighbors peeked through their curtains. The sound of the truck alone was enough to stir curiosity. But I didn't care. Let them look. Let them wonder. None of them knew the war that had just been waged inside my chest. The driver lowered the ramp, and when the Mustang rolled back onto my driveway, I felt tears streaming down my face. I didn't bother wiping them away. I placed my hand on the roof as if greeting an old friend who had been kidnapped and returned, bruised but alive. Take care of her, the driver said kindly before leaving. I stood there alone until the sun dipped low, painting the sky in oranges and purples Robert used to call good driving weather. Eventually, I rolled the car back into the garage and shut the door behind me. The echo of it closing felt final, like sealing a vault. That night, I barely slept. My phone buzzed nonstop. Missed calls from my son, Daniel. One voicemail from his wife, Melissa, that I didn't listen to. I knew what it would say. Something about misunderstanding. Something about love. Something about how I was being dramatic. By morning, my grief had transformed into something steadier. Colder resolve. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and waited. Around noon, Daniel's car pulled into the driveway. Melissa's white SUV followed close behind like she needed backup just to face me. I watched through the window as they got out. Daniel looked irritated, not guilty. Melissa looked annoyed, arms crossed before she even reached the door. I opened it before they knocked. What the hell, Mom? Daniel said immediately. You embarrassed me. I stepped aside to let them in. Sit down. They exchanged a look but obeyed. Melissa was the first to speak. You had no right calling the dealership. That sale was legal. I stared at her. You're sitting in my house talking about legality after sneaking into my garage and selling my husband's car. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. Dad would have wanted us to live our lives. You don't get to speak for your father, I said quietly. Not after what you did. Melissa scoffed. It was collecting dust. That sentence hurt more than I expected. That dust was 37 years of marriage, I replied. It was memories you were a part of. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. We needed the money, Mom. For Paris, I said. Yes, Melissa snapped. For once in our lives, we wanted something beautiful. I laughed then. A short, broken laugh that surprised even me. You wanted something beautiful, I repeated. So you stole it. Daniel looked away. I didn't think you'd notice so fast. Silence. I didn't think you'd notice, I said slowly. Melissa leaned forward. Look, Margaret, you're alone now. You don't need a classic car. We're starting our lives. Something inside me hardened permanently. Get out, I said. Daniel's head snapped up. What? Get out of my house. You're overreacting. I stood. Leave, both of you. Melissa rolled her eyes and stood first. This is exactly why people say grief makes older women bitter. Daniel hesitated like he wanted to say something more. Then he followed her out. At the door, I spoke one last time. Your father would be ashamed, I said. He flinched. That was the only sign I'd hit anything real. The door closed. The days that followed were quiet. Painfully quiet. I moved through my home like a ghost, touching things Robert had touched, wondering how I'd raised a son who could betray me so easily. A week passed, then another. I received a letter from the dealership. Inside was a handwritten note from the manager. I didn't charge a restocking fee. Some things aren't for sale, I cried holding that letter. Then, unexpectedly, my sister-in-law, Carol, called. We hadn't spoken much since the funeral. Daniel told me his version, she said carefully. Then I called the dealership. I said nothing. Margaret? I'm so sorry. Her support cracked something open. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being dramatic. I wasn't wrong. News travels fast in families. Soon, Daniel's cousins stopped replying to his messages. His mother-in-law called me to apologize, quietly embarrassed. Apparently, Melissa had been bragging about Paris before the tickets were even booked. Then reality arrived. Daniel showed up alone one evening. No Melissa this time. He looked smaller. Can I come in? He asked. I nodded. He sat at the table where his father once helped him with homework. She's furious, he said. The trip's canceled. I stayed silent. She says you ruined everything. I looked at him then, really looked. And what do you think? I asked. He swallowed. I think I messed up. A start. I don't know why I did it, he admitted. It felt easier than asking. Because you knew I'd say no, I replied. He nodded. We sat in silence. She keeps saying we deserve it, he said finally. But I keep seeing Dad's face. Tears filled his eyes. I hear his voice every time I close my eyes, he whispered, telling me I crossed a line. My heart ached, but it didn't soften completely. I love you, I said. But love doesn't erase consequences. He nodded again. I want to make it right, he said. I stood and walked toward the garage. He followed. I opened the door. The Mustang sat quietly, patient. This car, I said, will never be yours. He nodded without argument. And if you want to be part of my life, I continued, you'll earn back my trust. Slowly. I understand, he said, tears falling freely now. As he left that night, I knew something had shifted. Not healed, not fixed, but revealed. Some wounds don't bleed loudly. They echo. And sometimes losing respect hurts more than losing money. The car stayed. The memories stayed. But my family would never be the same again. Thank you for listening. Let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories. After Daniel's visit, things settled into a strange, fragile rhythm. It wasn't peace, but it wasn't war either. It was that quiet after an earthquake, where everything looks the same, but nothing feels secure anymore. I spent more time in the garage than ever. I cleaned the Mustang slowly, lovingly, as if every stroke of the cloth was a conversation with my late husband, Robert. Sometimes I talked to him out loud. I told him what our son had done, how disappointed I was, how tired my heart felt. Grief, I was learning, doesn't just fade away. It circles back when you least expect it. One afternoon, I found an old cassette tape in the glove compartment. Robert's faded handwriting on the label read, Sunday Drive. I sat in the driver's seat, pressed play, and suddenly his voice filled the car. He was laughing, talking about how Daniel kept asking if the car could go faster. I just sat there and cried until my chest ached. That night, my phone rang. It was Daniel. Mom, he said softly, Melissa moved out. I closed my eyes. She says I chose you over her, he continued. She says I'll always be a mama's boy. I thought about that for a moment, then I said, you didn't choose me. You chose what was right. There was a long silence on the line. I don't know who she is anymore, he finally admitted. I replied, sometimes people show us who they've always been. We just weren't ready to see it. He started coming over more often after that. Not to ask for anything, just to sit. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we didn't. He fixed a leaky faucet. He mowed the lawn. Small things. But it's the small things done consistently that rebuild trust. Melissa, on the other hand, never reached out. I heard through family that she blamed me for everything, that I'd turned Daniel against her, that I was manipulative, that I'd ruined their future. I didn't defend myself. People who know the truth don't need an explanation, and people who don't believe it never will. One evening, Daniel stayed late. We sat on the porch as the sun dipped low. Do you think Dad would forgive me? He asked quietly. I thought of Robert's kindness, his moral compass. Yes, I said. But he'd also expect you to learn from it. He just nodded. Months passed. The seasons changed. One spring morning, Daniel arrived with an envelope. I want you to have this, he said. Inside was a check. I picked up extra shifts, he explained. Sold some things. It's not about the money. It's about accountability. I pushed it back toward him. Keep it, I said. Use it to build a life you won't be ashamed of. He looked relieved. And proud. On the 1-year anniversary of Robert's death, I asked Daniel to come with me. We took the Mustang out early. The engine roared to life, smooth and familiar. Daniel drove carefully, respectfully, like he finally understood the weight of what he held. We parked at a scenic overlook Robert loved. The air was crisp and quiet. I never thanked you, Daniel said suddenly. For what? I asked. For stopping the sale, he replied. If you hadn't, I don't know who I'd be right now. I reached over and squeezed his hand. Pain doesn't always come to destroy us, I said. Sometimes it comes to redirect us. Later that day, I got a call from Thomas, the dealership owner. He asked, "How's the Mustang?" I smiled. "She's home," I replied. "Where she belongs." I could hear him smiling through the phone. You know, he said, I've been doing this job for 30 years. That was the first time I ever stopped a sale because it just felt wrong. I told him, I'm grateful you listened to your instincts. So am I, he said. When we hung up, I realized some people show up in your story as proof that decency still exists. Daniel and I never went back to how we were before. And that's okay. Some relationships aren't meant to rewind. They're meant to evolve. As for Melissa, the divorce finalized quietly. Daniel moved into a small apartment, started therapy, and started showing up differently. Not perfectly, but honestly. And me? I learned that protecting memories doesn't make you bitter, and setting boundaries doesn't make you cruel. Honoring the dead means refusing to let their legacy be disrespected. The Mustang is still in the garage, but now I drive it more. Sometimes alone, sometimes with Daniel. That car was never about Paris. It was about principles, about love. About knowing what cannot be replaced. My son lost a trip, but he found himself. And I learned that even when your heart is broken twice, once by death, and once by betrayal, it is still capable of healing, slowly, honestly, and on your own terms. Thanks for listening to my story.